Nothing Personal starts in 30 seconds. It's just business. This is Nothing Personal.
Here you go.
Thrust. That's the Nothing Personal word of the day. It is Monday, October 7th, 2024. Thrust, as in I thrust myself upon you every day for almost 5 years. We thrust ourselves into the world of sports when so much other stuff is going on. And I am here. We are live in Miami. If you're watching this on the Nothing Person with David Samson YouTube channel, or it's after 10 a.m., you're on the DraftKings Network. Wherever it is, guess what? Hurricanes be damned. Coca's here. I'm here. But better than that, Dan's here. Not for a sit-down, Dan. You're supposed to co-host. This is so fun to watch you this way, actually.
Thank you for sharing this space, this intimate space with me. And I'm saying that to you. I'm saying it to Coca, but I'm also saying it to your audience because they're probably used to getting this show a certain way. Information that covers a lot of terrain. And so I hope not to get in the way of that. I'm very appreciative that you share this with me.
I've never done the co-host thing. So I am anxious about that.
The way you do this is super lonely, David. I've told people before that the way that Colin Cowherd does it, the way Jim Rome does it, the way that you're doing it. I did it this way for a long time in Sunday morning sports radio, and I needed the communal laughter. I needed something that was shared. I didn't like doing it this way.
So I get that feedback and that laughter in my own head. And what I normally do is I'm speaking into the abyss. And so
yeah, it's cavernous, echoing laughter. It's how people go delirious and like Defoe in The Lighthouse. Like in black and white, you just go crazy.
Every once in a while, Coke is in my ear, which is good. But I envision everybody watching and what they're ready for. We've got to start. And it's amazing. We chose this day, and we chose it based on calendars, as we do everything in our lives. But obviously, you know where I'm starting. If you are my audience and you've been with me, and for that I'm appreciative. As you know, we started with my mother back in October of 2019, and now we get to do this every day. We're starting with the day, which is October 7th. If you don't know, it's been a year since the attack happened in Israel, and I have been fighting with myself all weekend. I knew you were going to be here for the last month, but really the fight started this weekend as I was thinking about how do I talk about Major League Baseball playoffs, which I desperately want to get to. There's so many amazing storylines, and I don't mean about the scores of the game. So many things are going on that are perfect for Nothing Personal. But people who know me know I've got to start here because it's personal. This part's personal. And what's happened the last year, I want to try to make people understand it.
Not Raiders Broncos. We're not starting with Dolphins Patriots.
I can't do it.
No.
I'm happy at 9 a.m. to start with the silly, if that's the direction you're going to go today, when I'm lucky enough to do the show with you. I just can't today start with the silly because every day there are people who are needing to be entertained. Every day. That's why we all get to do what we do. Every day people want distractions. My issue, what's happening now, is the misunderstanding surrounding October 7th and the fighting that's going on amongst me and people who I'm very close to. It's never happened with any of the other issues that have confronted me throughout my life, whether it's guns, whether it's abortion, whether it's politics. The issue of the war that started October 7th, it's staggering.
It's part of your imprinting. It's part of your identity. It is funny how you take pride in nothing personal. It's all business. But this one, I don't know that there is subject matter that I can put in front of you that is going to get you more emotional. You're very reasonable. You're a lawyer. You're somebody who can argue anything, even if he doesn't necessarily believe it. But when you're arguing from a place of emotion and everyone's so divided. There's so much hate everywhere. There's so much anger. There's so much fear. That's a cauldron of ingredients. That when you throw in emotion in there, it makes it even more complicated.
So what I'm referring to is the craziness of normally all Jews are together, and we're together against prejudice. We're together against people who are trying to oppress us. Half the holidays you spend growing up and talking about oppression and how you're trying to work through it. This is an issue that started really in 2016 when certain members of the Jewish religion, the Jewish culture, were pro-Trump. Certain were pro, whether it was Clinton or pro-Biden or pro, it doesn't matter. It's based on Israel. It's one-issue voters. And you may have that in Miami. There's one-issue voters here. The issue can be economics. It can be life. It can be life. For Jews, the issue is if you are not pro-Israel, and the problem is no one defines that. And then last October 7th, to me, it became very clear there was a long in the Middle East, and it's been existing since before I was born, and I'm afraid it'll be existing long after
long
I'm dead.
before you were born.
Long before all of us, and we learn about it without, in between being kicked out of Hebrew school classes. We don't learn about it much in regular school, but here's the thing. Everyone is living together in no peace. That's what the Middle East is. And I've been there, and I have family there, and if you talk to people who are both up north and down south in Israel, they live in a different way than we live. We live in New York. I grew up worried about the 81st Street gang. I didn't grow up worrying about bombs coming to me, just a different thing. They live with that, and that's their sort of equilibrium. But then October 7th, Hamas decided to attack, and it was a terrorist attack. I don't think there's any other question about that. And it just has opened the door to a level of anti-Semitism for the last month that I've always thought existed, and it existed when I was in Montreal. It exists all the time. But what's happened, it's become normalized, and it is impacting not just Jewish people, but it's impacting black people, brown people, gay people.
There is safety and a feeling of community, and these things aren't absolute, right? When you say our community is pro-Israel, yes, you can be pro-Israel, but how does that align with also being anti-slaughter, right? Like you have two things happening here that are complicated for centuries. I remember, David, like along the plot points in my life, I remember sort of when I learned that it was possible for a suicide bomber to be in a cafe in Israel, or when I learned that there is a shield protecting Israel because there's
Iron Dome.
Yes, when I learned that Israel has the safest airline because everybody is trained if something happens on an airplane to protect, because you've learned over so many years to protect yourself. And a year ago, I learned something that I didn't know, which is, wait a minute, what do you mean people can parachute out of the sky? And I can see video of innocent people being taken away and being made hostage. So I understand how that leads to a great deal of fear, and I understand why today would be a day that would not be unlike 9/11 is for Americans.
It's just, the problem with today is that you're going to read, and there'll be rhetoric, and it'll be up to you, and I want the audience to really think about this issue. It is a day to think about two things, in my opinion. Let's just get down to the nitty-gritty of it. One, there's still hostages being held. So it's been a year, and they're American hostages, and we don't know if they're alive or dead. And one of the reasons there's been no ceasefire is there is a hesitancy of Hamas to agree to a ceasefire because it would include a trade of hostages, and there is the illusion that the hostages are alive, and Israel has the belief that they probably aren't. And so why engage in a trade? What they don't realize is that what Jewish people want, they need parts of the body to bury. That is a hugely important thing. And that is something that Hamas is not willing to give to the Israeli families who are sitting today wondering, it's like purgatory. It's like what happened after 9/11 when there was no way to identify remains, or it happens after plane crashes. And it puts people in a position where they can become irrational. And when they're irrational, they're emotional, and they're not clear about their position. So I wanted to be clear in this sea of non-clarity. I am not in favor at all, personally, of humanitarian slaughter. I'm not in favor
Who
of
who
war.
can be in favor of that?
There are. Let me tell you.
I don't.
There are many people
look,
in favor of it.
The discourse around this, I understand that Palestinians aren't very well represented in the American media, but the discourse around this can't be so divisive that we cannot agree on all being anti-slaughter of innocent people. You can even argue about whether you are or aren't anti-war, but anti-slaughter of innocent people, that is not one that we can abide a lack of consensus on.
And the old story, eye for an eye. So the story that's given to us that we're supposed to proffer as Jewish people is they started it. So us getting rid of Hamas.
Always a mature way to end any argument is we're children and everything else.
It?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
And
we're a
getting in
year
trouble.
we're a year into they started it.
And you realize that I've got pressures, family pressures. I've got friend pressures with the platform to take a certain position. And I have spent the better part of the last 4 days trying to understand how am I letting so many people down with my position.
What do the arguments look like in the family? Because I know I've had these as it relates to everything that's happening in America right now with divisions and politically. Like the Cuban people do not align. The people that I have made my living with and off of in Florida, in South Florida, as someone who proudly identifies as South Floridian, I'm surrounded at every turn by Trumpers, and I am obviously not that. How does this go in your family? Make it most personal. How does this go?
It's trafficked in guilt. How can you not make it clear to everyone with whom you speak that what they did, they started on October 7th, and we have every right to retaliate. And if it involves killing civilians, that is the negative of war.
And you're not allowed to ask family members, and how long? Like, how long do we do
and
this
the answer
for?
given is until Hamas is destroyed. And intellectually, I understand the concept. I have family who is living there, and including there's 1 degree of separation to people who died, much like we have for 9/11, 1 degree of separation for people who died in 9/11. But I am very, very hesitant to ever to have recency bias.
Do you find yourself in intimate groups saying, well, how much slaughter is too much slaughter?
What I get more personal with that, which is how can you guilt me into a position that I think is rational and it's actually well thought out? And do you not think that that is the cause of the entire issue, both in the Middle East, in Africa, in the U.S.? Everyone is so entrenched in their position.
But these are people you agree with, right? These are just degrees of agreement, right? Like these
are people I'm supposed to agree with.
But you largely you do agree with them that of course Israel has a right to protect itself. It becomes a conversation about what are the degrees of protection? When
so I've
is
been
enough?
Bullied. So yes, of course, I understand protecting yourself, and Israel needs to exist. They have the right to exist. Israel to me is everything. However, there has to be a path forward where the conversation doesn't go from October 7th to everyone being okay with anti-Semitism. That is where I draw the line. And what's happening on college campuses, what's happening as you walk down the street, and I've walked through protests in New York, they don't know a thing about October 7th. They don't know a thing about the Middle East. They just know about the tropes of Jews and power and money and anger and frustration. Is the same thing as being racist. That's the part I can't come to grips with.
That part has been hard to watch over the last year. The Nazis in the street and anti-Semitism. I don't know that it's ever very well cloaked, but having permission to be out in front of people in a way that appears to be growing, that part has been hard to watch. And I imagine that a whole lot of people are mad about what's happening on college campuses, even as I understand some people being saying, well, there's another side being slaughtered here, innocent as well, and being uncomfortable with that.
Having permission, that's something that's interesting that you say that I think about. There was a game last night in Los Angeles. What makes people think they have permission to get involved in that which they bought a ticket to watch? I always wonder that, running a team for 18 years. And we had to have meetings about security and keeping players safe because, and this was really before gambling had taken over. There really wasn't as much gambling. Did you see what happened in the Dodger game?
Yeah, the throwing things on the field, the entitlement that the customer has to dehumanize the entertainer.
I'm trying to think about the best way to stop it because there's easy ways, which is you put netting around, you put glass around, which makes the players feel much more like animals. That was the big fight about adding netting next to the dugouts. There were so many lawsuits about balls and bats. I would never let my family sit above the dugout. So dangerous it used to be.
Screaming foul balls seem hugely dangerous behind a dugout if you're sitting there with grandma.
It is unreal that people think they can catch a foul ball. If we put normal people on the field to catch a pop-up, they would not be able to catch
We've
a pop-up.
transitioned, by the way. We are now going to baseball. We are now moving to sports. We're going to – I just want to make sure –
before you mentioned it.
Okay, all right.
You didn't even have to mention it.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Nothing personal. We just go right through.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We're on to the next topic.
All right, I'm sorry. I didn't know we were doing very serious subject matter, and now we're at the Dodgers.
We had it.
We're at the Dodger game. You think you were going to fool me? You think you fooled both me and the audience transitionally? You think that? Okay. My bad. I shouldn't have allowed people to look behind the curtain. I apologize in advance for fouling up anything here in terms of your structure. I know you're a structured creature. I'm apologizing. Sorry.
And Coke, of course, is in my ear. That was terrible, David.
Okay. I wanted to make sure that we were leaving the previous subject matter because it's heavy and you're fighting your family with it. And there are baseball games and football games to talk about. I never know where to start on some of this stuff. There's so much real world happening. David, we're right now in a bunker and you felt the employees here. We're very worried about Milton. We're about to have a storm surge that doesn't have a lot of precedent hit Florida. And so there's a lot of stuff happening in the real world, and we're over here in concessions, eating cotton candy and talking about the baseball game.
When I walked in the door this morning, the first thing is, wait, you came this week? And so people are a little shocked that we would fly south when everybody is sort of flying north.
Yes, everyone, it is chaos in Florida, but I'm legitimately sorry. There were a lot of interesting things that happened in that Dodger game last night. And they're not all playing related, even though I think the Dodgers are in legitimate trouble. The Padres do not fear them at all.
Didn't you think they were in trouble before the series started? Padres are a better team.
Freeman, they're better. I mean, they're about the same as teams, but Tatis is important and Freeman being medicated. They're already admitting that he shouldn't even be out there.
You know what we used to do to players? They want it. So I never forced players to get the shots of Toradol. They wanted it.
Yeah,
they want to play. And Freeman doesn't need to play. He wants to.
Yeah, but they're such a different team when a third of all the at-bats are Betts, Ohtani, and Freeman. Like that's a monster lineup, and they're in trouble.
Don't you get to say that a player is not the player that they have on the name of the jersey? Betts is, I think, 0 for his last 69. He's not effective. So
he's hurt too.
He just at some point, and we talked about this, if Ohtani, Betts, and Freeman don't play well, that's the end of the Dodgers.
The Dodgers are at a point where it's please Ohtani save us, and he may. He's good enough that he may, but the Padres do not fear them. But getting back to what it is that you were saying, we are in absolutely a place where the customer feels entitled. Not every customer, obviously, to throw things at the player.
Do you feel LA is that city? I always associate Philly, New York. I've never really associated. Now I've known the fights. There are unbelievable fights that happen outside Dodger Stadium. We actually had a rule for our players when we played the Dodgers that no one left until the place was emptied, unless you were able to leave with security. And we did that for outside, but we never felt the issue inside Chavez Ravine.
Anywhere I put emotion, a 10-2 loss, stakes, and liquor, if I combine that in the cauldron, and you've got all of the expectations the Dodgers now have of being the new school Yankees, where we've got the most money, we get all the players that we want, we get to be the powerhouse, I can see that happening just about anywhere.
I don't want to be in a place where that happens. And I know it happens overseas in soccer games, and they're called, what are they called, hooligans? I think there's a show, Hooligans.
Yes, that's, yeah.
I don't understand, because really our job is to keep players safe. I thought the security was not effective at Dodger Stadium. We rehearse these things. And there was a security guard. What actually happened is Profar robbed Betts of a home run in the first inning in the best defensive play you'll see all year. Play of the day, it's play of the year, no recency bias. He was in the stands. It's his dream. We had to lower the walls at Marlins Park because Stanton wanted to, the irony of Stanton playing the field, he wanted the ability to go into the seats to catch a home run ball.
It's got to be one of the greatest feelings that you can have anywhere in sports. I've often asked the question, what is the better feeling? To end a game with a walk-off home run that you get to run around the bases and enjoy it for a minute, or to end the game by reaching over the wall, catching a baseball that denies a home run, and you're the only one in the stadium who knows for a second that you're the one who has it.
It's so hard for the latter to happen. You just don't see it often where you have the broadcast fooled, Mookie Betts is fooled, he's running around, and Profar played it up. And Profar's being looked to be the bad guy here, but he's not. He actually went later in the game to give a ball to the fan wearing the jersey, to the fan who he caught the ball from. And then that fan looked at the ball and threw it back onto the field, but not toward Profar. But then someone else said, oh, we can throw balls on the field. He then threw a ball at Profar. And that started all of it. And then cans were being thrown at Tatis and in right field. And then the Padres are off the field. And there was an 11-minute delay because of fan behavior. And when we practice it, it is explaining to the security guards. We go through, it's like an active shooter practice, which we also did, shockingly, but you had to. What you do with someone who jumps on the field and runs, what you do with people who throw things on the field, people who fight in the stands. You have all of these different scenarios. Where were the Dodgers security guard? He watched a ball being thrown on the field, and he just sat there.
I don't know that you can prevent exactly that without putting a cage around the field. Once you combine all of the elements I just mentioned, it's not just losing and liquor. There are plenty of people in the world, whether they're trolls on the internet just trying to incite others, who want to be like the Joker and just see the world burn, who want to be the first match that causes the spark, that causes the explosion. There are plenty of people. There is so much, David, out there in terms of anger and loneliness and in general, things that people are bringing to the ballpark to try and escape from, that these ingredients, I don't know. You can practice all you want to try and stop them. You can rehearse and everything else, but unless you put a cage around the field, I don't know how you prevent this.
Well, the ultimate way to prevent it is by having them perform on a stage, which is what COVID was, where there's no fans.
Yeah.
And that may be where we're headed.
Antiseptic, it is not where we're headed. They still need the revenue from the ticket prices.
We actually thought about that. Would you give up gate revenue if the alternative were no league? And the answer is you have to. So now let's go a little less. Would you give up half so you leave 20 rows around the park?
It's pretty punitive right now. If somebody wants to go streaking on the field, David, the inconvenience of that for the 7 seconds of fame is you get caught in a bureaucracy of you lose your freedom for a while, and it's kind of annoying and punitive to get penalized with money and lack of freedom for a while. It's a great deal of inconvenience for 7 seconds of stardom. You've got to make the penalty stiff, but I still don't think you prevent it when somebody's had 7 beers.
So are you saying there's no deterrence? Because I'm a big fan.
Not as long as you allow fans, emotion, losing, and liquor. Like if you combine all of those things, you can only you can make it punitive. But when people are frustrated because they don't like Tatis, some of them are going to throw things.
I'm not a fan of hurting the many because of the behavior of the few. It doesn't mathematically add up to me. And yet my whole life is dealing with, that's the reason why my candy gets caught every time I fly. And that's why shoes come off. It's because of what one person or a few people.
Oh yeah,
have done.
but you know this, okay? You know this, having been in sports for a long time. Usually, it's not real leadership that results in proactive action. You have to have the calamity, and then you'll get the reaction. We've seen things like this a bunch of times. Let Tatis get hurt, though. Actually get hurt, and see if the reaction's not more outsized. Because you need something
hurt by something that's thrown?
Physically hurt. Yes, we've seen a number of things thrown at players.
Batteries? I was
things.
there.
When have people been actually hurt, like legitimately hurt in a way that all of us recoil and then you get the seismic movement of leadership has to behave in a way that's active instead of reactive?
This fascinates me because actually what you're now saying is what happens with terrorists. It makes perfect sense that you don't have the overreaction prior, which in the beginning of the show you mentioned what LL does. They make it so there isn't an event like that. They actually pretend there had been an event, and then they have the security protocols in place.
You mentioned the change in shoe at the airport. Do you remember how that happened? It's after 9/11, the airports closed down. Security takes hours and hours and hours. And then some guy on a plane is found trying unsuccessfully to light his shoe because he hit a bomb. And then after that is when they took the shoes off.
That's what we all do. We're all reactive. And I am saying that I don't understand why we have to be. If you have the ability to forecast things, we know that things get thrown onto the field.
It requires leadership, and leadership, Abraham Lincoln said, risks unpopularity. And you know as well as I do how often leaders don't want to be unpopular. You were never afraid of that. You were uncommonly not afraid of being unpopular, but I don't think you found yourself surrounded very often with other people that you admired their leadership and said, oh, those people don't fear being unpopular.
I didn't fear being unpopular. What I feared was failure. What I feared was something happening that would hurt the safety of the people there. I told you the highlight of the All-Star game in Miami in 2017 was when the last person left the ballpark. That's the only time I enjoyed that All-Star weekend.
There are a number of ways that you are unusual, but you being almost fundamentally immune to the idea of being disliked, not caring about being disliked, I would say trained from very early in life as someone who had to fight off bullies, you stopped caring about whether or not people liked you or not. It wasn't important to you in terms of how it is that you did the math on what in life was important.
When I go through stories and think about concepts, when I think about Major League Baseball and I think about my work and my life, I never think of it in terms of popularity. And players don't. When Tatis is there and he's in right field and he's making his gestures and doing the sort of sexual things he's doing and watching cans being thrown, he's not thinking about whether he's popular. The players don't do that. I never did that. What they're thinking about is, wow, this is fun until it's not. I had fun in the moments, in the characters that you play as the president of a team or as a member of your show or my show. I enjoy living in all those spaces.
It's really unusual, David. I don't think you understand just how unusual it is that you didn't care whether or not you were liked. Most people listening to this care a great deal whether or not people like them or dislike them.
I got taught a lesson by Harry Samson. Harry Samson, my grandfather. Actually, I had two grandfathers who taught me the same lesson, which is weird because they weren't really friends. That how do you worry about things that you can't control? And it was pointed out to me all the different ways that people die of heart attacks and the way that people put themselves in a hole. And they're always worrying about stuff that they can't actually change. It's
funny.
like the hurricane.
You're funny, though. For like you can control a lot of things. Control and the illusion of
That's
control
why I worry a lot.
govern you. But it's funny that you think that you can't control whether or not people like you. There are a number of different things that you can do to increase the probabilities.
What?
Charm, just general.
What?
There are any number of things. Sales and charm. There are a number of things that you can do to increase the fact that you haven't considered this is amusing. It's because of how little you actually care about whether or not people like you.
I stopped that when I was in 7th grade and I wanted a girl to like me, and I tried everything. And what I realized is my only shot was to go deep into the friend zone, and then I became Ducky. And that is when I realized that there was not one thing I could do. And then it manifested itself in Morgan Freeman's voice in Bruce Almighty. You cannot make someone fall in love with you. So what exactly can I do to control? Do you think people like you universally?
No, but no, absolutely not. In fact, I have always had in my life issues that I have yet to be able to harness on I can be strident, I can sound obnoxious, and if I just turn down the governor a little bit on that, I would get my message across better. Never mind liking me, it would be something that would just simply get me heard more, and I haven't actually been able to do it. But in my case, I would make the argument on behalf of the principled things that I am, and then say whether you like me or not becomes a consequence of that, and I don't care to play those probabilities. The things that I care about and I think are meaningful are more important to me than whether or not someone likes me.
Boy, that sounds a lot like my position.
Oh, I don't think you care at all whether people like you. I don't care. I care very much whether my employees like me, for example. That's something that matters to me, and it's not a good way to do business.
That's actually the one group of people you shouldn't care about in that way.
There you go. I care, and it hurts me when they don't, and it hurts me when I've disappointed them. And so I understand that you and I are built differently like this. And I would ask you again, without getting too derailed, have you met anyone in leadership whose leadership you totally admire that you would say cares as little as you do about whether or not they are ever liked?
No, because their ego lives in that place. I've met many leaders with egos way bigger than mine. But a lot of that ego is fed with the view of, listen, how many owners... There are owners who they focus on tweets and on articles, and they're obsessed over them. Bud Selig would pore over newspapers looking for anything negative said about him and then call the writers.
He would do it with me. I don't think of Bud Selig as a good leader. I think of you as a good leader. I think this trait is something that serves you as a leader. You are someone who accomplishes things, at least in part, because you do not give a bleep what anyone thinks.
So... what do you think about people who don't care except when it comes to their sports teams? This is something that is fascinating me. Some owners, when they buy a team, act totally different than they did when they were running their business to get rich when they started. And they all of a sudden start becoming totally egomaniacal and totally I'm never wrong. Jimmy Haslam is one of the great examples of that. As the owner of the Cleveland Browns, there's a major issue going on in Cleveland, and I'm here for it. I love it. I want Deshaun Watson to never win a game. I want Jimmy Haslam to suffer under the 230 million pounds of shit that could fall upon him for what he did by signing Watson. And now it turns out Watson stinks.
It's the worst contract in sports. It's an anchor unlike anything in that sport. They have a problem at quarterback, and the problem is their quarterback and the percentage of money they're paying him when that quarterback can no longer play.
Makes me so happy.
Which one makes you happier? Because there are a number of baseball storylines that make me think that you were happy when Steve Cohen was losing. You were happy when the Padres were struggling. Which, when you're doing maximum hating these days in sports, who is the entity that is receiving the most happiness because you're hating the hardest?
Coca and I just had a conversation about this maybe a month ago. It becomes a major problem when there is a series going on and you need both teams to lose, and you're hoping for a calamity like a hurricane to just delay the fact that someone's going to win. And I am trying to not be that way. I am actually rooting for the Padres, and to root for A.J. Preller hurts me, but to root for the late Peter Seidler gives me comfort.
Who has the most Scott Boras clients? Because I would think that would be the place where you would deliver your maximum hate.
So I was thinking about that with Pete Alonso, who he's a Scott Boras client. He's going to be a free agent. And I know how Scott
You root against Scott Boras's clients?
100%. I'm aware. I used to have a list. You can have a team that wins, but the player is 0 for 10.
Okay.
And I am totally fine with the Mets winning as long as Alonso goes 0 for 10.
So you were really crushed the other day. The Mets are doing amazing things in the late innings. I was just arguing the other day that Pete Alonso home run is the biggest one in Mets history because they have so few memorable home runs. You can make the argument that one, which has never happened before, winner-take-all game, 9th inning to take the lead, you can make the argument that it's the biggest home run, and you're cursing Scott Boras as Alonso, as the polar bear rounds the bases?
What I was doing is saying, please, owners, do not get sucked into thinking that's a $100 million home run. That's what I was thinking. Because Carlos Beltran had a great postseason. He parlayed it into a contract, and he was terrible. So you just can't believe that postseason. But they do.
That is
So,
such a great series,
I-
by the way. That series, Philadelphia and New York fans hate each other so much. Bryce Harper's one of the best postseason players ever. They're going to boo him so hard when he gets to New York. That series is so much better than all the other series.
Well, Philly fans, I was always more scared in Philly than LA. Always. I mean, Philly fans are rough, but they don't throw things at me. They would just hurl insults at our players.
I mean,
Terrible
they
insults.
they can throw things as well. It's a scary group of people.
Juan Pierre would come off the field and talk about the things that were said to him, and it's just staggering.
It's also, though, the best and only home field advantage that remains in the playoffs when they're at home. Like that team.
Yet they split,
Okay.
and they almost lost 2.
Yes, they almost lost 2, and home field advantage doesn't tend to mean much in that sport. But that's the most electric atmosphere that there is at any ballpark in the big leagues remaining in the postseason.
Owners do get involved. I was thinking about the coach of the Browns who came out and said we're keeping Watson playing. He doesn't make that decision. The owner obviously is calling him and saying, Stefanski, hey, keep playing Watson. Keep playing him. We're doing that. So Stefanski comes out and says, hey, we're sticking with Watson.
Once
even
you
though he's
bench
not-
him, you've lost him, and you have to eat all of it once you bench him. Once you put in Jameis Winston, like that is a short-term measure that becomes a forever solution, because once you've benched Watson, you don't go back to him.
Did you feel that about Bryce Young?
Yeah, I think
They went back to him yesterday a bit.
They're two different things, though. I think Bryce Young is finished in Carolina, and I don't actually think he's ever been good in the pros. But this particular thing where they have rallied around him as an organization and done something to protect him when he didn't deserve protection in self-interest, they have a calamity. It's an unsolvable calamity. Like, what would you do? Would you just bench him?
No. As a president and owner, no. I don't want to be that wrong.
Oh, really?
That's
See,
what.
this is what I say, though, about risking unpopularity when you're a real leader. It surprises me to hear you say that. One of the most amazing things that I have seen happen in that sport is with the Rams when McVay, they gave Goff a big contract, and then a year later they said, never mind, we want Stafford. I thought that showed enormous confidence and almost could have only come from someone in his early 30s who had a great deal of success, because most, quiet as it's kept, these men in the leadership business who are always preaching toughness, they tend to do the things that get them the least criticism.
Well, this is getting the Browns the most criticism by continuing to play Watson. I think it's happening the opposite way. They're playing him when they shouldn't be. But I know how owners think. They think this way with players who they've signed. And Deshaun Watson, I don't think there's another signing in football that was as controversial as this.
No.
Maybe ever. Well, there have been a bunch of baseball signings.
They
that have
gave
been
him
rough.
so much guaranteed money. So much guaranteed money.
230 guaranteed at signing.
They wrecked their architecture by doing that. But none of us could have seen at the time. People were competing for his services. None of us could have seen at the time that he would short circuit in a way that would make him bad at playing quarterback. Not average, not mediocre, not serviceable, not game manager, bad.
Is there a way that so can you fix a mistake? I don't know if you do this with your show. Do you keep compounding something that's bad? That's what I try not to do on Nothing Personal, or when I'm running a team or a business. If you see something is going down the wrong path, the ability to change course, and I can do it in business, but when it comes to a micro issue, and Deshaun Watson in the scheme of the Cleveland Browns, that's really a micro issue. Do we play him another game or not? It's very hard to discern when you have to change paths.
I don't think I'm a good leader. I don't have a skill set over time that has worked that skill. I've always been a bit of a solo person, and so I'm not a good person to ask that question. You have a body of work of making decisive decisions. You are you are somebody who's made a ton of decisions for a long time that affect a lot of people.
The only thing I will never do is the Animal House scene. I will never lead people into the wall, lead the band into the wall. That may be a reference that no one knows.
No one knows, but just imagine a
Unbelievable.
marching band just marching into a corner, and that's what our entire show is. And what is my solution? Hire more people to march into the corner.
Behind
Like it's not fix people, it's not change people, it's not lead better. It's just pay more people to march into the marching band into the corner.
And they walk into like what's the the
trombone.
Coca. The trombone is the long thing. That's with the guy.
You're playing
and
bow
you're
and arrow.
hitting
You're playing
people
bow and
behind.
arrow more than trombone. But
Well, isn't trombone that?
Yeah. You're doing. But I love that you're asking Coca what musical instruments are. Now I see why Coca's still here. Why is he shaking his head sadly? What's the matter with Coca?
He may be frustrated right now.
What's he frustrated by?
My guess is he's frustrated. We haven't gotten to the break. We haven't gotten to the review yet. We haven't gotten to the picks of the day. He's as structured as I am. And so when you were coming to do this with me, we didn't know how it would go. And normally my derailments are solo. And then he can control my derailments by yelling. I think that controlling both of our derailments.
Do you want to go?
Difficult.
Let's go to topic by topic. Let's get to topic by topic. Coca, what do you want us to talk about? Just tell us what you want to talk about, and let's cut through them.
He's been saying it 3 times.
All right, let's give people the good stuff.
I want to talk about Josh Allen.
All right. The entire Bills organization played late in that game as if it had been concussed. They just were throwing from their end zone late in the game, coughed up
That's
a game that makes the difference between 4-1 and 3-2. They give him smelling salts, and he was obviously concussed. The football hasn't gotten any better at being able to solve what is an invisible brain injury.
I get nervous that they're treating Josh Allen differently than Tua, or different than a bunch of other players they put into the blue tent. It used to be smelling salts. That's going old school.
It's inexact as a science, David. Like they're just trying to figure it out as they go.
See his head hit the turf?
Yes.
That
He was
doesn't
obviously
seem-
concussed.
I thought he was unconscious.
We all diagnosed him as concussed there.
I didn't diagnose him as concussed. I thought he could have been dead. I'm not good
That's
at
a different
diagnosing
Bills player.
concussion.
That happened to a different Buffalo Bill.
He
Hugely
was
violent.
dead.
That's right. Hugely violent sport that they're oxymoronically trying to keep safe when there's no such thing.
But that was the eggshell skull situation. Do you know what that is? The legal concept that if I hit you in the head, a normal person would be totally fine, but you've got this weird eggshell skull, and I happen to hit you in a really bad place, and you croak right then and there, that's actionable. And the way they hit Hamlin, the medical story that I read, and I'm going with it because I read enough different pieces on it, it was just like being hit by lightning. He was hit in the exact place at the exact millisecond to cause his heart to stop like that. He can play football the rest of his life, get hit in the chest. I think when Tua got the concussion against Buffalo, I think he put his head into Hamlin.
Science in general can be inexact. This as a science is hugely inexact.
Well, because we just see, but what we see is a guy who hits his head. We've been seeing this in the cartoons forever. When Bugs Bunny gets hit and he sees stars, that's the concept of what happens when you get hit.
Josh Allen was terrible long before that yesterday. That is as poorly as Josh Allen can play. The Buffalo Bills are capable of being the best team in the sport when he is healthy, right, and not turning the ball over, and they're capable of looking like that and still being in games against Super Bowl contenders, but fouling up the game at the end the way that they did is inexcusable. It's the worst time management you will see this season.
There's time management issues that coaches have all the time. So I didn't find it was egregious, but there's egregious problems at the end of every half, at least once.
It's the worst I've seen this season, and I think it's the worst we'll see this season.
You weren't more taken aback by his head on the turf and then coming back in?
Of course I was.
I was way more taken aback by that. That was much more telling to me about how football is run. And I was wondering if there's an anti-Dolphin sentiment or an anti-Tua sentiment, because why is Josh Allen being treated in a way that he's allowed to come back?
I think that Tua now has the reputation of someone who is more made of porcelain, and Josh Allen is a bit of a centaur there, so he can absorb physical hits almost better than anybody who plays the position because he's so physically large.
Would it be fun for you? Would you, back in your heyday, would you have gone into the clubhouse, into the locker room right after that game? And were you the guy who would go to Josh Allen and say, hey, were you dead? Like, did you like going into the clubhouse after games?
I liked going into the locker room. I liked the emotion of it, and I liked being off to the side, not in the scrums, but off to the side with the players where I could have something a little bit different. But they have less and less need for that now in football, and the media is being made less and less important, and now they want us out of there entirely. I
spent 18 years trying to figure out how to deal with media in the locker room, talking to players in spring training about media. When I first started, it was the beginning of having women in the locker room, and we would talk to the players, hey, listen, don't players walk around naked all the time in the locker room. And I didn't find it appropriate because I was worried about lawsuits and worried about harassment and all sorts of things. Well, now there's something happening off the field in the NFL. The Players Association is coming out and begging them to stop letting media in the clubhouse, that it's interfering in our space. Let's have no media come in. And they are calling for the NFL and the Pro Football Writers of America. They literally released a statement about it saying, please change the way we're doing this. It's a different world. You don't need to be in our locker room.
I think they're right. I don't like that they're right. This started with the pandemic, and I want that access, but more and more these athletes are understanding that they don't need us to be this close to them all the time. It prevents us from doing the job as well as we'd like, but we have now more ability to be close to the athlete because they control their own social media. I saw a director the other day, and this will probably offend you, who said that movies are no longer the most impactful art form, that it's now social media and it's video games. We can get close to the athlete without the help of the media. And while I'd like that access, I understand why the players want it the hell out of their spaces when they're naked and coming out of the shower.
So I think it has nothing to do with them being naked and coming out of the shower. I think they want to control their own money, their own monetization, their own story, their own narrative. It used to be the media was required as the conduit to getting out interesting tidbits about themselves, and now they just do it on their own platforms.
Do you know how much it hurts me that they used to give the newspaper columnist the courtside seat? The important newspaper columnist would get to sit front row. And I've seen over the years, as newspapers have died and columnists have become less important.
The rafters?
Yeah, now they put us near the retired banners and stuff. Yes, I've seen that.
Is it like at weddings when, as you get older, you move further and further away from the dance floor because they don't want people to see that you're not getting up and not dancing?
You don't blame
You're
athletes.
irrelevant.
You don't blame athletes, though, do you, for not wanting it? And I'd ask you from the management perspective, do teams actually need it? Do you want your athlete getting in trouble because he said something emotional 7 minutes after the game instead of just getting the media the hell out of there?
No, because we control it now. It didn't used to be this way, but later on in my career, and certainly today, we would meet with players who we knew were going to be spoken to by the media after games. Hey, you're going to be asked about, like Tatis in last night's game, or Machado, or Flaherty. Jack Flaherty had a whole scrum in front of his locker talking about what he did with Machado and the fact that he hit Tatis, etc. And he was ready. He was polished and ready to go. And players are much more media savvy now than they ever were. And media savvy to them is their agents telling them, hey, you've got a brand. Sometimes the brand is guns and violence. Sometimes the brand is drugs and women. Sometimes the brand is just sports, and it depends on who the player is. But the problem is the media, it's not important anymore.
Whose brand right now is drugs and women? I think that's a lane for somebody in sports to be the counterculture drugs and women brand. I think that they need the media so little. Think about how things have changed for us, David. Used to matter to have a photo shoot with Sports Illustrated. Do you think anybody playing in football or baseball right now wants to take 3 hours out of their day to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated because they do a photo shoot?
We didn't have to convince Stanton to get body painted. Do you remember that cover?
Yes. I mean, if I had that body, that's how I would walk around all the time.
Just with body paint.
Just body paint. I saw Stanton the other day is the slowest person in the big leagues. He can no longer run. It's like watching a
fake news
statue run.
He's 184th out of 188. Okay. That is not the slowest.
Okay. There are 3 slower than him?
4. 184 out of 188.
Who? The catcher for
I
the
assume
Royals?
Salvador Perez has to be one of the slower
catcher for the
ones.
Royals is the only one.
That contract was terrible. We got to get to the pick of the day. We didn't even get to the review. This is what happens when it's only 50 minutes.
Did we ruin it or make it better, Coca? Did we? I like looser David. David needs less structure, not more. David's got enough structure in his life.
I like the structure of the pick of the day, and we better hurry. I went 0 for 3 this weekend. I had the Padres over the Dodgers in Game 1, got it wrong. I had the Phillies over the Mets in Game 1, got it wrong. I was right for Game 2s. And I had the Patriots beating the Dolphins. I didn't realize that
It's
it would
important
be a
that we get to
15
the pick
10
of the
game.
day. People need to know.
DraftKings.
Yes. Let's
Critical.
do it. 0-3.
Don't you have bills to pay?
Yes. 0-3. What are you picking
I'm
today?
135 and 143. I keep track. I'm accountable. I have a whole document on davidsamsonpodcast.com. Every way to see, every movie review, every pick. Accountability. We need that in this company. I'm taking the Royals over the Yankees. If you haven't seen Regan's pitch, he's good. And plus, they're underdogs.
A lot of flaws in that Yankee lineup.
It's true. And I've got the Tigers over the Guardians. Those are the two picks. Please watch that.
I like the Guardians to smoke the Tigers.
He's the best pitcher you've ever seen. Scooble's the best pitcher. Have you seen him pitch
Best
yet?
lefty. Yes. I don't understand. If that guy existed in the 1990s, he would have been better than Kershaw before Kershaw. Like, first time I saw him pitch, I'm like, oh, my God, how does anyone hit that? But I think that a lot
He may
these
not have been
days.
alive in the 1990s.
Alvarado's the same way to me. I don't understand how anybody hits
I
him
hope you
from
come
the
back
left side.
tomorrow
I hope so, too.
because this has been great. We're going to find out what the audience thinks because for us, we could say it's just business, but this felt personal today.
It was personal. Thank you for having me.